Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With us today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you today.
Happy Monday, Dr. Paul.
Thank you.
Yep.
Doing fine
Good,
here.
good.
We're going to start off with talking about, believe it or not, something about COVID.
Yeah, and politics.
How it involves politics. It's been a political scandal all along. I mean, you know, from the very beginning, the overreaction was a political overreaction. But right now, Politico is giving us a hint that maybe this is a sign that it's really ending or something. Here it says, the COVID campaign trail vanishing. People don't want to hear about it. And they did, I think they cited a poll that showed that it's not as high on the agenda for the people, the higher and the worries. And I can't believe that. I think it is, but maybe the part that the people are getting tired of, it's still COVID, and it's probably all the mandates they're sick and tired of hearing about. But I don't think it's the fear-mongering that the people are expressing. Too many people are catching on now. And this to me, I think, is an attempt maybe to shift the emphasis and make sure that the Democrats don't look like, well, people are rejecting this whole issue and concerned. Maybe the Democrats think that's not a very good issue. But anyway, it's interesting because they're spinning it. That's what they're doing, and trying to get it. Their name of the game is money and political power. And this is just, I think, a minor step. But they're not going to emphasize it like they did 6 months ago or a year ago, because it was always, if you weren't willing to put everybody in prison tomorrow, you were un-American, you know, that sort of thing. So I think this is something that deserves watching, and they've made it a political event out of it, and they're even testing it in the polls. But I think it is an important issue, but quite frankly, my assessment is that people are sick and tired of the mandates. And people, oh no, that's not it. They want the government to protect them and take care of them, because they certainly took care of the press secretary. She's doing fine with all their plans. So anyway, this is a pretty interesting issue. I think it's going to be around. They're not going to get rid of it before the current election, and they're not going to get rid of it before the next year election either. I think it might even be a bigger issue when you think of the deterioration of the economy associated with the mandates, which have been very, very destructive. Although we've talked about the initial stages of this downturn was, Federal Reserve determined, and they're still involved. The Congress is by spending money and over-regulating and all these things. But right now, we can expect that this will still be a big issue next year. And if they don't start doing Republicans and Democrats having better policy, they might expect that they should be prepared for several years.
Yeah.
Many years sometimes it takes to straighten out. And I think of the 30s. The Depression was delayed because of government prolongation of it by doing more of the same thing that caused the Depression.
Yeah. Well, first I'll apologize, Dr. Paul. Every time we hit October and that weather changes, I get a little bit of a bug. So my voice is a little rough. But let's put up that first clip. This is from Politico, of all places. And as usual with Politico and most mainstream media, there's a spin involved. But let's look at face value. People are over it. COVID vanishes from the campaign trail. They're talking about Virginia, which is tomorrow is the election in Virginia, the gubernatorial. Very fascinating. Virginia has not had a statewide Republican elected since 2009, I believe. It's been a long dry spell, and all of a sudden Youngkin is coming up from behind against McAuliffe, and I think this is probably one of the big issues. Here's from the Politico article. Now, this is how the term they use is so important: COVID fatigue. The evidence for COVID fatigue is everywhere. In the closing days of a bitterly contested gubernatorial race in Virginia, 23% of voters ranked COVID as one of their top 2 voting issues, according to a recent Monmouth University poll. That's down 10 percentage points from the previous month. Just 11% of voters ranked the pandemic as the most important issue. So, but they want to spin it as, well, it's just everyone's tired of it, but that's not the case. But this is a former top advisor to Governor Phil Murphy in New Jersey, if you remember, is the biggest lockdowner after Cuomo. Quote, everybody's just ready to move on. And here's a political strategist based in Virginia, Ben Tribbett. He said, quote, "It takes away a great issue, a great issue." So they're sad, but I think they're misreading it, Dr. Paul, because I don't think people have COVID fatigue. I think they have COVID anger, and that's why they're trying to portray it.
They want to distract from that.
Distract. Yeah. Oh, that's old stuff. Don't remind us of the tyranny.
I think that's really what's going on. There's a lot of anger now, and maybe a different type of poll was done. They might find that the people are more upset than ever, but it's at the lockdown, it's the mandates, it's their loss of liberties, it's the cost of money, it's the stupidity of what's going on with putting masks on kids, and they've never proven there was any benefit to this. So I think they were trying to guide the scenario and take away from it, but I don't think all of a sudden this means the opening salvo of the elimination of the COVID being an issue. This is going to be an issue for a long time because the diehards are still absolutely determined to use this, and it's international, as we'll point out later. It's international to have this international vaccine passport, intimidation and economic control, and so they're not giving up on this. So this whole notion that there's less concern about the COVID, let's hope we're on the right side, because that would be a positive. That would mean that people are waking up and maybe wanting to deal with it.
Well, Dr. Paul, we're nonpartisan here. We just try to look at the issue. But I think the real issue is whether Republicans are going to roll over like good little dogs and play out of the Dem playbook on this, or whether they're going to try to harness that anger. And I think you used the right word, anger. That anger is below the surface. I think it's terrifying the Democrats. We saw it in New Jersey over the weekend, 100,000 people chanting a pretty obscene thing about the president. They don't like him. Everywhere people in public can congregate, they're chanting variations of "Let's Go Brandon," which is kind of a code for a very bad thing. So that anger is so strong, I think it's terrifying the Democrats.
Do you think Biden is anxiously waiting for the next car races so he can go and wave?
I don't think that's going to go very well. In fact, when Biden was with McAuliffe in Virginia, he was holding a town hall meeting in Arlington, which I used to live in. It's as blue as you can get, and the chants were "We love Trump, we love Trump." And it was pretty embarrassing, I think, for Biden.
Well, good. Just so it's not embarrassing to our desires for liberty. I want to talk about a specific person that's involved in this in a personal way, and that has to do with Psaki, Jen Psaki, the press secretary for the president. And people know her. She's one thing different. It's almost a year, and she's still in business. And I think in the early year, one thing that I was unhappy with is when Trump became president, he had a lot of different press secretaries, which means there's not a strategy or there's not a uniform plan. But so far, she's held up pretty well. She's still there, and she's had to preach the gospel about what to do and brag about the president, what his orders are, and that we're around the corner, we're doing fine and dandy. But there looks like there's a monkey wrench in the plans of the propaganda we're supposed to be listening to. She ends up, believe it or not, she knows all the rules. She followed them religiously, at least she says she has. I can't, it just blows my mind. She, and I guess a lot of other people in this country, have gotten 3 vaccines. And from my viewpoint and the viewpoint of other virologists, is that it doesn't make sense. It's like, how many vaccinations you want to get for your bad cold, and it go on and on. So they take these vaccines. So she's had the 3 shots, but she really had to protect herself because she wouldn't want to set a bad example. She wore 2 masks, and yet there's no evidence that the masks have really protected anybody from anything. So that's what's going on. But then she comes down positive. And now she's quarantined, or she will be quarantined, or getting over her quarantine. But it's pretty amazing. Wouldn't she be the poster child? She's not a child, but the poster poor person to demonstrate. Ask questions. Is this stuff really working? She has access to the best doctors and all the money and all the medication, but she's probably against the law for her to use the medications that a lot of our friends would say would be good, like ivermectin, and no, they can't use that. And hydroxychloroquine, no, they didn't push that very early either, but they sure pushed a lot of other things, expensive drugs, and the solution is vaccination, because even if you do get it, it will be not nearly as bad. And there's pretty good evidence that shows that some very famous people had all the vaccination, got the infection, then died anyway.
Yeah.
So it's this idea, and yet if you challenge it, you still could be canceled from society, mocked as being un-American, and lose your job. The whole thing is still out there, and maybe once again, maybe the people are waking up and getting sick and tired of hearing these stories. And that's why, people aren't quite as interested in this COVID epidemic anymore.
Yeah.
Maybe it's fading away. The truth is, there's an item of truth there, because the real number of cases and deaths from COVID have gone down, but they don't talk about some of the complications from the vaccines.
Well, I think the real thing about the Jen Psaki issue is that it really underscores how the narrative is falling apart. She's an obsessive mask wearer, we know that. She does at least 2, who knows how many she's hiding in there, at least in public. She's got all the shots, everything that's recommended, boom, boom, boom. But presumably, from what the news reported, she caught COVID. Presumably, her family members are also vaccinated. My guess is they would be, from vaccinated family members. So if she's vaccinated, her family members are vaccinated, she's got a bunch of masks on, yet she still catches it. That's very harmful for the narrative that tells you, go get a vaccine, it's going to protect you. They're still trying to spin it, though, because this is what she said. Thanks to the vaccine, I have only experienced mild symptoms. But that's also faulty logic, Dr. Paul, because no one knows what kind of symptoms she would have had without the vaccine. She's a pretty young woman, not pretty young, but pretty young woman. I'm not making a judgment about her looks. She's a young-looking woman. She looks like she's healthy. She probably goes to the gym. Her chance of getting sick, according to the statistics, we don't know her medical history, is extremely, extremely small. So you can't make the leap from saying, well, I would have died if I didn't have it, and thank goodness I have mild symptoms, because we just simply don't know. And I think people are waking up to that.
It's sort of sad, but understandable, of people poking fun at that whole theory, because having a milder case didn't seem to help Colin Powell very much. It's a lot of talk, too many variables, and ordinarily, if you didn't even an infection like this, there will be a lot of variables, but when the government takes over the whole thing like they've never done before, the variables are all political.
Yeah.
And the science is pushed aside. And so that might be one of the things long term, that might be one of the most serious things, is the attack on science. And this is really a problem, because this is affecting medical training and medical school, and people who teach in medical schools. They have to be very cautious, because, I've spent all this time studying science. But as far as I'm concerned, if they know better, they ought to speak up.
Yeah. Well, let's do a couple of clips and catch up before we can. Skip that next one and go to the one with Jen Psaki if we can. This is a New York Post report. This is a tweet reporting the New York Post. Press Secretary Jen Psaki tests positive for COVID-19. Our friend Kathleen O'Neill writes, wait, that's weird. Do masks and vaccines not work? And here's the next one, too. Now, she's choking on her own words now. This is when she was yelling at the rest of us. This is really becoming a pandemic of the unvaccinated, Psaki says. Well, her own infection undermines that perspective, that it's all of our faults, not speaking about myself, but all the unvaccinated people's faults. So it's interesting to see. But we're moving on now to an interesting study from the Lancet, right?
Right, and they've
Year-long
done this
study.
before,
Yeah.
right?
Big study.
So The title is a Lancet study exposes limits of the vaccines at preventing COVID. Well, that's what we've been just talking about.
Yeah.
And it's supposed to limit, and then they frequently say that they'll get it, but it'll be milder. But there's so many cases that explain that isn't necessarily the case. And the breakthroughs and all the promises that they have. But Lancet is one of the few. They have a good reputation, and they're persistent, and they take their time, and they get their statistics differently than just calling up Dr. Fauci and ask Fauci for the stats in order to write their articles. So I would say Lancet so far has allowed a lot more people to understand this in a more objective way than we've been exposed to elsewhere.
And it's a long, detailed, year-long study, and the conclusions are, again, further undermining the narrative. Because the narrative, as you know, Dr. Paul, is yes, there are breakthrough infections, but they're very, very rare. Okay, but that's not what they found. And this is fascinating. This is from a BBC article. Even if they have no or few symptoms, the chance of them, meaning vaccinated people, transmitting the virus to other unvaccinated housemates is about 38%. That's not very rare. 38% chance of giving them COVID. That drops to 1 in 4, or 25%, if the housemates are also fully vaccinated. They're presenting that as if it's somehow an argument to get vaccinated. But you go from very, very, very rare breakthrough cases to you've got a 1 in 4 shot of catching the disease, even if everyone in your house is vaccinated. That doesn't seem very rare to me.
The other reason Lancet's on the list of those people who can't stand the scientific truth is their argument and their statistics says that natural immunity is superior, to vaccine protection. So, of course, that seems to be natural. That's what most doctors have learned in the last 100 years, except for the last 10 maybe, that things have changed because it has to fit the scenario. And of course, there's been many more vaccinations. And of course, I've told many times that one of my first vote in the first week I was there in 1976 had to do with a vaccine, a political stunt, called up and proved a lot of things were wrong on the theories then and had nothing to do with science. So they've been tinkering away and hacking away at science for a long time. And I think that that is going to linger. People are going to have trouble because a lot of times what you learn your first several years in medicine, that sticks with you a lot longer. It's new and it just stuck there. Getting rid of that thought, even when there's an alternative, is more difficult. And that's a lot of people are getting introduced to bad science, and then it's also political too. This is and very practical. Oh, you mean I might not be able to get a job? I can't be a teacher and do all these things if I don't do exactly as they tell me, or I get canceled. That to me is the signs of an authoritarian government, and they're at a point where liberty is put way down on the list of concerns.
Well, this is another reason that people are losing faith in the so-called experts, because everything they say just turns out to be wrong. And here's a good example. Let's look at these next couple of clips. This is Walensky just back in April. She said, "It's official. Vaccinated people don't transmit COVID-19. This is from Fortune magazine. Well, just a couple months later, let's look at the next one. This is based on the Lancet report. This is Bloomberg Business. Vaccinated people are just as likely as unvaccinated people to spread the Delta variant to contacts in their household, a year-long study found. So from if you get it, you can't, if you get the vax, you can't catch or spread it, to, well, you're just as likely as the unvaccinated. And then they're expecting everyone to jump in line and say, hey, shoot me, shoot me. They're wondering why there's so much resistance to it. It's because of this. And people aren't dumb. So I guess we'll move on now to
Yeah,
our. We'll go to Europe. Let's go to Europe.
There's an organization over there called the European Parliament.
Yeah.
They were going to unify Europe. From the very beginning, I was skeptical on that. For some reason, I thought it wasn't very natural. And I said, well, eventually someday the Germans are going to argue with the British and the French are going to argue with the Italians. And it just doesn't seem nearly as conducive as it was for the United States to be more unified. But they wanted to put it together, and there were skeptics. And we had a friend very much involved in, Britain breaking away from that. That was Nigel Farage.
Yeah.
I think he was on our program.
Yeah, he
but
was.
He still speaks out. But we want to quote. I have a quote here from another member, somebody I hadn't heard from before, and it has to do with vaccine passports. And this is, when I saw this, I told you, this almost sounded like a Patrick Henry speech.
Yeah, absolutely.
It is just really great. So I have a couple quotes. You may have some too of hers, because I think it's fantastic, because she addressed him and she was sick and tired of it. And these long quotes and long message, this comes, Zero Hedge has it up on Sunday's program articles. And but here's some of her concluding advice. Always question everything any government does or does not do.
Yeah,
Not
good.
too bad. Always look for the ulterior motive. That's pretty good. And always ask call bono, who benefit.
Yeah.
We've been doing a lot of that asking, and I think we came down to pharmaceutical companies are on top of the list.
Yeah,
Somebody's benefiting. Whenever a political elite pushes an agenda this hard and resorts to extortion and manipulation to get their way, you can almost always be sure your benefit is definitely not what they had at heart, or what they told you.
Yeah.
As far as I'm concerned, I will not be vaccinated.
Wow.
Here's Patrick Henry. She must have met Patrick Henry. I will not be vaccinated with anything that has not been properly vetted. Oh boy, that's going to hurt these vaccine companies. And tested and has shown no sound scientific evidence that the benefits outweigh the disease itself in possible long-term side effects, which to this day we don't know anything about.
Yeah.
And the speech goes, it's a little bit longer than that, but it's not overly extended. It's a speech that anybody should be able to understand. And if people disagree, challenge it and debate her or do whatever you want.
Yeah.
But this is the message that it's where it's coming from right now, because we think that there was a time when we used to think that the real the significant country that protects personal liberty is here in the United States with our Bill of Rights and our Constitution. Well, it turns out that there's some people around the world popping up that are very, very much sick and tired of the mandates, and they're resorting to, once again, talking about and resorting to the principles of liberty.
Yes. And she's a member of the European Parliament, as you mentioned. Her name is Christiane Anderson, and it's a very powerful speech. And in fact, let's listen to a couple of short clips. She gives the speech in English. Let's listen to that first 43 seconds. It's almost what you read. Let's listen to her say it, that first 43 seconds of this first clip from her.
But it is not the goal that renders a system oppressive. It is always the methods by which the goal is pursued. Whenever a government claims to have the people's interest at heart, you need to think again. In the entire history of mankind, there has never been a political elite sincerely concerned about the well-being of regular people. What makes any of us think that it is different now? If the age of enlightenment has brought forth anything, then certainly this. Never take anything any government tells you at face value.
Don't trust anything. I could see her speaking at one of our conferences, right? Let's do this
Wouldn't
next
that be
one.
great?
Yeah, it would be great. Let's look at this next one quickly. This is where she talks about the grotesqueness of the mandates and the profits made by the vaccine companies. I think we're only going to watch maybe 34 seconds of this one. Listen to this one.
So much. We're doing this for you. All through Europe, governments have gone to great length to get people vaccinated. We were promised the vaccinations will be a game changer and it will restore our freedom. Turns out none of that was true. It does not render you immune. You can still contract the virus and you can still be infectious. The only thing this vaccine did for sure was to spill billions and billions of dollars in the pockets of pharmaceutical companies.
Billions and billions of dollars in the pockets of Big Pharma.
Well
great.
said,
Yeah,
right?
well
Boy,
said,
that
well
is
said.
something else. But that's encouraging. I mean, that was one of our most positive things that we can mention today is
good news.
is that, and it isn't like people have to make that decision, but just allow this debate to occur. So far, it's so rare that you hear these statements after all this time. It's almost 2 years now this has been going on. And the other side, the pro-vaccine people have dominated. They have a monopoly control of the media, and it may be, because it happened because they happen to control a lot of money.
Yeah, that's true.
And political power.
That's true.
So-
Well, you had a couple of miscellaneous
Yeah,
things you
there's
wanted to
one
mention
here,
before.
Australia once again.
Amazing.
They're pretty weak at times, but there's been some resistance there.
There is some.
There's some that are starting to protest. Australia confiscating bank accounts. Confiscating bank accounts. That's my statement here. Property, licenses, and businesses for non-compliance with COVID fines. But there is one quote here that I wanted to use because I couldn't believe it. They'd go to this extent. They have a lot of regulations in their tickets and fines. It's control. It's control. They haven't developed a concentration camp yet, but you are being pestered to death if you happen to live in Australia right now. He says, if you've checked in, this is what they can do under current law. If you've checked in at the grocery store, they know how far from home you are, and the police could figure out if you violated your 1 hour of time outside the home at the next checkpoint.
Wow.
Why did they put up with that?
Not even East Germany could do that. They didn't have the technology back then.
Yeah, well, that's why the technology is a two-edged force. There's so much in life that it has two edges. And one of the examples I've used over the years has been the nuclear power.
Yeah.
It could warm the world and give us so many wonderful things and cheap power. At the same time, it can blow up people. So.
Wow.
And here they're blowing up people, as far as I'm concerned, to do this. So too bad.
Yeah. Well, I had a couple of clips before that, and this is just Dr. Paul. This, the G20 summit over the weekend. They're telling us we've got to eat bugs, stop driving our cars. Meanwhile, they're all flying in their private jets. I think Biden took 800 people with him. They had some 80-some cars. It's so for thee but not me. Here's a couple of great clips. This first clip, and I'll set it up this way. They're gathering for a photo op. They've all got their masks on. You hear click, 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 click. They're taking all the pictures, and then you hear someone say, okay, you can take your masks off now. Let's have a look at this clip. This says everything you need to know about the elites, one rule for the elites, and one rule for the rest of us. Listen to the clicks. It's a short clip. Okay, the picture's over. You can take off your mask now. And this next one is Merkel from Germany. Same kind of thing. This is a long clip, but I'm only going to play part of it because the first part is Merkel. Then there's also Macron who does the same thing. Let's just look at the Merkel half. Here's Merkel getting out of her car at the G20. Get that mask on. Yes, you're safe. Now watch her walk in. Mask off. Mask on, mask off. One rule for them, another rule for us.
People in public office or any place, they shouldn't have the right to lie. But that can become arbitrary and subjective. So most of the time people don't go to prison for lying. But I think it should be pointed out what they're doing here is very, very dishonest.
Yeah, very.
I mean, this is not being honest, and yet these are the people that get the masses to gather around them. And unfortunately, I think too many in the masses are trying to survive the conditions that these people created.
Yeah.
You know, the government regulations and messing around and debt is one of the major reasons people get poor. And then the government comes along and say, well, we're going to take care of you. So the more problems there are, the more they need the government. And that cycle has to be broken up. And I know the answer to that. Just introduce the notion of personal liberty and personal decision and personal responsibility.
Exactly.
So do you have some there?
Well, I have a final one, but you have an update from New York and.
Yeah, this is pretty straightforward. This is just again. This is not Australia, and it's not the European Union. It's in the United States.
Yeah.
Mandate meltdown was still happening. 26 New York City fire stations shuttered. LA sheriff warns of mass exodus. Tucson Water District faces staff shortages. And this is probably just a little bit. And then you have people who leave because it's so uncertain, so dangerous, and they're really not, they're not too anxious to take their next job, and then the jobs go begging, sort of like this monstrosity that they've created with transportation and hauling goods and services. There's a lot of very probably logical reasons why they can't get drivers. So but it's a consequence of the government over-regulation. There's so many things. So this isn't good enough for me. I want to see some of this stuff saying, when are the resistance?
Yeah, hold the line.
Tell them you don't like this stuff.
Hold the line. There are a lot of brave people out there. Well, the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to play a couple more clips as a good news thing. But I will remind our viewers, and I'll thank them for watching the show. But please go and sign up. Go to ronpaulinstitute.org. Sign up for subscribe to free updates, and also have a look at our website. Make it something you browse. We do have several new things up every day. We try not to overwhelm you with things. But here's some good news stories, Dr. Paul. And the reason I do this is because you're never going to see this anywhere else. This is what's going on in Europe over the weekend. First of all, here's Verona, Italy. People protesting the vaccine passport in Italy. They'll never show this on the mainstream media. Let's have a look at the Italians. Let's just do the first 17 seconds of this. Now, if they were protesting for a new green tax or something, you better believe it will be on there. Well, here's New Zealand, which is one of the most locked down states in the world. Let's look at a little bit of this. It's a short clip, but just look at people in New Zealand. A lot of people out. They're tired of it, and they are rebelling. And that is a good thing. Civil disobedience is a good thing. So take courage, people. Take courage.
Boy, I think that's great. That to me, say, deep down in the souls of most people is the desire to be free.
Yes.
And yet people in general are susceptible to lies and innuendos and promises, false promises, and wanting to be helped to deal with the problems that the government already creates. But I think the souls of just about everybody in the world, except for those who want to run your life. And I think that's where the minority of people who are the true authoritarians, they will do anything because they have no conscience. They will do whatever they can to get power and control and money. And others are more complacent in this, well, it'll get better. We have a good constitution. We have the Bill of Rights. And maybe if we vote for the right people, this sort of thing goes in. But no, I think this is why I'm not I don't come down on the side of pessimism where, there's no way where we can win. No, I think there is. And of course, I mentioned many times that I was encouraged many times, during my presidential runs by going to university campus and talking to young people where there's a lot of action. And I think there's still the desire to be free, but people need to be energized. Just think because of a special type of governor in Florida, I think he's done wonders, he's probably, I don't even know what he thinks of our program or libertarianism, but I know his instincts are good and he has an idea about where government should be and where the people should be with the desire to have personal liberty and responsibility. And we have to just keep lighting those matches of get liberty flowing again, that sort of thing. So I'm very encouraged by that. Do you have a closing?
I'm all done, Dr. Paul.
Okay, I want to thank our viewers for tuning in once again. And, this is difficult for us to, dissect all this, but actually we get a lot of benefit personally, at least I do. I get personal benefit from this because I do know that a few people do show up and people respond. They respond favorably. And I was on a bit of a speaking tour just recently, and I still had a lot of people who were middle-aged people, and I just love it when they come up and they say, it was my 16-year-old or my 14-year-old that got me involved and interested in what you're doing. So yes, young people get them involved, but these are, middle-aged people will come around and even learn from their young people. So, and to me, it's a job, and obviously, I applied this to myself. I spent a lot of time reading Austrian economics and libertarianism, and I described it as it took me a long time to learn things to get rid of the things I had been taught most of my life. If all the schools and the media and government, that it isn't easy. It may click, they give it to you, they feed it to you, and they can influence you. But eventually, when you decide it's steady, I still have to read as much as I can to find out where is the trick. And that's why the statement coming from the parliament member from Europe, watch out, watch what they say every time, because they're not working, she's talking about the government, they're not working in your best interest. So the working for our best interest is usually, first it's the individual that has to know and understand what is the best interest for you and your family, your friends and your neighbor, and how do you promote it, how do you get them educated, how do they learn responsibility. And there was a time some of those things were just automatic. That's what families and that's what freedom was all about. And then I think we've drifted a long way in the past 100 years, but I would say when we see some of this excitement going on around the world and in this country, people are waking up. And they said that you wake up one person at a time, but I'll tell you what, there's more than one person saying, rah for liberty, because those crowds are turning out, and it's around the world. That's a good sign. We need to encourage that, but we have to be responsible for ourselves to make sure that we know and understand to get people enthusiastic, because it makes good sense too. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.